Welcome to part 2 of the Fundamentals of Kicking series. This part is going to be focusing on pivoting of the foot and how that relates to correctly turning your hips into position to execute certain kicks. Now, each part in this series is designed to be like a piece of a jigsaw puzzle that fit together, and integrating them all together at the same time will improve your kicks exponentially. Now, on the surface, each part of this series might seem almost too simplistic or kind of just common sense, and you might be thinking, nah, this is just a series for like beginners or people who've never experienced kicking before. But that's seriously not the case. In fact, if you've actually been training for a while, you're more likely to have some bad habits ingrained which are hampering your progress without you really knowing about it. So try to keep an open mind with this and try to identify where you might be doing some of these things within your own technique, and you'll be able to improve yourself. Common sense does not mean common practice, so bear that in mind. Pivoting and turning their hips is probably the single most common problem I see martial artists face. And a lot of people become frustrated because they just can't get their body to do what they want it to do. I believe the major reason that people don't really know about this is they were never actually taught it by their instructors, and that's likely because they didn't even really understand it themselves. Even my own Taekwondo instructor would just say the differences between kicks and say, this is a front kick, this is a side kick, and that's about as far as it went, with no more detailed explanation. I only learnt this stuff by watching my own footage back and then comparing it to other people I wanted to move like, and then adjusting it from there. When many people identify there's a problem with their kicking, they'll set out to change something, thinking that's the underlying cause, but often that's not the case. With regards to this part of kicking, 99% of people will point to what they think is a lack of flexibility being the cause of why they're not able to move in the way they want to. But overwhelmingly, a bad pivot, which leads to the hips not being able to open correctly, is actually the cause, which just leads to a lackluster kick at the end. This would be like having a problem with a movie that you're watching at the cinema, and your solution is to yell at the screen in front of you, hoping it will change. The result of that is completely frivolous, because the real origin is coming from the projector room, and by the time it hits the screen, it's already a done deal. So now let's talk about the two most predominant positions of the hips when kicking, and these are square and turned. So the square position is applicable to things like front kicks and axe kicks, and the turning position is applicable to the others like side kick, hook kick and turning kick. The square position means that our hips face directly towards the target. The turn position is where we face side on to our target, which is achieved through pivoting on the standing foot. Correctly pivoting on the standing foot is of paramount importance to getting your hips turned into the correct position to execute an effective kick. This is something that I believe is grossly misunderstood by many martial artists, and as a consequence overlooked, meaning that their kicks never really improve. As mentioned before, many people believe a lack of flexibility is the reason behind their poor kicking technique, but overwhelmingly it is because of bad pivoting. And if you continue to do that, not only will you ingrain it into your muscle memory, and the kicks won't be anywhere near as effective as they could be, you can also grind the joints of the legs together and risk injury as well. The best way to illustrate this point is by talking about the angle at which a kick comes in towards its target. So if this is your center line here, and say if you're doing a turning kick that comes in from the side like this. Now, if you are kicking correctly, however you kick and whatever height you kick at, the kick should come in at the same angle each time. The hallmark of a poor pivot and bad alignment of the hips is where the kick starts low, okay, and then as it goes up, the angle starts to go upwards until they're almost performing a front kick when it's actually supposed to be a turning kick. So as you can see here, this is starting off okay, but as the angle goes up, the kick gets weaker, and this is a really weak kicking angle here. As opposed to turning the hips correctly, look at the alignment of the body, it's completely different. And even at the highest point of the kick, it's still a nice strong kick. So the way we want to pivot for the turning of the hips correctly is by fully turning the foot away from your target so that the heel is facing towards it. You don't necessarily need to do that to get the right hip position at a low angle, for instance, but it's a good habit to get into doing whatever height you kick at so that you'll naturally do it when kicking higher, and this is the way I do it. The key to really dynamic kicking technique is to get into that pivoted position as fast as you can. The faster you're able to get into that position with your hips aligned, then the more explosive your kick's going to be. With kicking, all of the energy starts with our feet as we pivot, then travels up the body to its apex where the kick is extended. You might want to imagine this in terms of the metaphor of when you like whip a towel out. The stored energy is transferred from your hand through the towel to the end point where it's finally discharged. So by remaining very relaxed to start with, you're going to use then the muscles of your legs combined with your hands to turn your body into that correctly pivoted position. That'll make the kick kind of just happen all by itself after that. And one of the best ways I've found to actually do this when you get comfortable with it is to almost jump yourself into that position, so the foot goes from exactly where you're facing your target in your fighting stance to completely turned into the correct pivoting position, which makes the kick really, really powerful and explosive. You see many people kick like this where they slowly turn the hip into the pivot, which is a good starting point, but once you're familiar with it, then you should begin to speed it all up. In a moment, I'm going to close out this video with a collection of different clips of different kicking techniques, with the pivot clearly shown to illustrate my point. And perhaps the best way again to practice this is slowly holding onto something for your balance, so that you can really, really focus on that element that you want to burn into your muscle memory, in this case the pivot and turning the hips correctly. That way you can really concentrate on that pivot and practice how it will feel to kick in this new way, while also strengthening specific muscles that you're going to need to be able to keep the form at higher intensity levels. I hope you enjoyed this video guys, and I will see you next time.